In this emergency episode that we release on a Tuesday, we share details on an urgent student loan deadline and more information on the dissolution of the SAVE plan. Let's get started. Are your student loan payments or loan balances a major obstacle in your financial life? Then tune in and let's escape student loan debt. Hello and welcome to another midweek. If that is an odd sentence, it is because if you're one of our consistent listeners, you know that we typically release our episodes on Friday morning, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Not necessarily saying that that's the exact time that you listen, but a Wednesday is a departure for sure, and we are releasing this emergency episode because there is an urgent student loan update for federal student loan borrowers of which you need to be aware. Now, if you are listening to this, I'm not sure on which platform. This is an episode where if you don't have kind of an already baked in developed understanding of federal student loan terminology, you need to listen to the Escape Student Loan Debt episode because there may be some things that are shared that are a little bit confusing to you. We're going to go fast. I'm going to talk about a lot of concepts that may not be familiar, so familiarize yourself by subscribing to that podcast. That's not me trying to cross promote. It's not me trying to cross promote. There is just a basic reality that federal student loans are very complicated, yet there are people in both of our audiences to which it is relevant. So we wanted to make sure that we released this episode on both platforms. But the reality is our Escape Student Loan Debt listeners are going to have a bit more familiarity. So I'm going to do my best to talk about this urgent deadline in a way that's applicable to all, but there may be a little background reading or background listening to. We'll put some links in the show notes to some relevant episodes that will help get you on your way. So what is this deadline? Well, today, the release date of this episode is April 1st, and April 1st is important if you are a Parent Plus borrower. I promise you, if you're not a Parent Plus borrower, there's still a reason to continue listening to this episode. You don't have to just turn it off. We'll get to you in a second. But if you are a Parent Plus borrower, meaning you took out a federal student loan on behalf of your child, today is D-Day for a very important reason. To give you some quick context, if you have a Parent Plus loan, there are some steps that you have had to take historically to position that loan to be eligible for forgiveness through Income Driven Repayment plans, and importantly, if you work in public service, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Thankfully, many of those steps have been cut out, and now all you have to do to position yourself for the lowest income-driven repayment plan possible is take your Parent Plus loans, consolidate them, and even though this sounds crazy, you can consolidate a single federal student loan. I know that defies the definition of consolidate. It's just a quirk of the federal student loan system. But if you have that Parent Plus loan, you consolidate that loan. You then sign up for a payment plan called the Income Contingent Repayment Plan. That's an income-driven repayment plan that allows you to base your payment off of what you make instead of what you owe. The problem is it has the highest payment of all of the income-driven repayment plans under that umbrella. So after you have consolidated, signed up for the income contingent repayment plan, paid 1 month on that plan, you can then switch to a more advantageous income-driven repayment plan. That's a mouthful, but if you have any familiarity with these plans, you'll kind of already be familiar with the lingo. Just trust me, even if that's not you. If you go through this process, you'll be able to have a lower payment than you would have otherwise. Where does April 1st come into play? April 1st comes into play because for current Parent Plus borrowers, if they want to position themselves in that same way to have the lowest payment possible, they have to do all these steps before July 1st. That means that technically June 30th is the deadline to take care of the consolidation of Parent Plus loans that's needed to position yourself as best as possible. April 1st comes into play because while it is not a hard and fast rule, it typically takes 60 to 90 days for a consolidation application to be processed. And importantly, you can't do this and just say, oh, I did it, meaning I signed up for a consolidated loan. You have to have signed up, applied, had the loan consolidated, and have a brand new loan by July 1st in order to be eligible. So if you have a Parent Plus loan currently and you want to be on the right side of this exchange, April 1st is definitely the preferred deadline, by which point you need to have at least put that application on file, Maybe you luck out and it didn't necessarily have to be April 1st because it's consolidated in shorter than 90 days. But to be safe, April 1st is the date you want to use to make sure that that process is completed and the new loan dispersed by July 1st. Now, another reason I want to bring this up that is not necessarily April 1st related, it's more so about the future and the viability of Parent Plus loans moving forward. For any Parent Plus loans that you take out on July 1st or later of this year, you permanently lose access to income driven repayment plans and public service loan forgiveness. So what I would tell you, if you are a parent of a person who is either in college or who is going to be in college in the near future, I would strongly discourage you from taking out a Parent Plus loan if you can't pay that loan in full. If you can pay it in full and you have the income to do so, and it's not a concern that's going to keep you from retiring or keep you from living a full financial life, then go on and do what you need to do and take out that Parent Plus loan. But if you are doing so thinking that you'll be able to manipulate your payment and lower it in retirement, which many people do, as odd as it sounds, there's a strategy that's called the borrow and die strategy, where essentially people will take out student loans on behalf of their children, and they'll essentially just lean on a reduced retirement income to pay as little as possible towards those loans for the rest of their years, and they will die with those federal student loans. But because federal student loans die with you, it's not a burden to the child. So they call it literally the borrow and die strategy. That's going away. So if you do not have the financial resources to pay off this debt in full, as terrible as this sounds, after July 1st, I would consider for most people Parent Plus loans to not be an option. Whether that means that your child has to take out that loan on their own, if they have already maxed out their loans, if they have to go to a private student loan lender, if it means that they have to go to a state school instead of a private college, I don't know what that means for your household. I just know I have a responsibility to tell you that it is not as straightforward a decision. And if you're not aware of just how devastating paying these loans back can be, it's not something that you want to find out after the fact either. So make sure you are careful in your decision-making process for how you support your children in terms of their college costs after July 1st. But for today's purposes, April 1st for current Parent Plus borrowers, very important day. Make sure that you're on the right side of this conversation, and if not, take action today to get an application on file. Next, I have an update for our borrowers who are on the SAVE plan, the Saving on a Valuable Education plan, and it has to do with more clarity as to what's going to happen in terms of when the plan will be closed, what options borrowers will have, and then also the timeline by which they'll have to make these decisions. So there was maybe about 8 or 9 days ago, a page that was thrown up on studentaid.gov, an announcements page that talked about the court's decision, which we talked about in our recent episode of Escape Student Loan Debt, to close the SAVE plan. But there was not much clarity given as to kind of what happens next. Well, this is one of two announcements that I'm about to throw up on the screen that kind of walks you through next steps, not just for SAVE borrowers, but also shed some light on some relevant actions for just any federal student loan borrower that we hadn't had to this point. So I want to share it on screen. We'll put a link in the show notes. It gives some fast facts to talk about the fact that the SAVE plan was deemed illegal by the courts. And it then goes into a section where it talks about the changes to the current IDR plans. Some of these changes mean that there is no longer a SAVE plan or a revised pay-as-you-earn plan. This also means that the subsidies and loan discharges that were promised under the SAVE plan will no longer be in effect. Now, here are two very important things. The first thing is applying a weighted average of payments made on loans included in a consolidation loan to that consolidation loan. Let's stop there because this is something that I thought we had some positive news on, which apparently we do not. What happened prior to the Biden administration was if you had a series of federal student loans that had various amounts of credit towards forgiveness. Let's say that you had one loan that had 10 months worth of credit. You had another loan that had 3 years worth of credit. You had a third loan that had 6 months worth of credit. When you consolidated those loans into a new loan, you lost all credit towards forgiveness. And people would do this because they had loans that weren't eligible for things like public service loan forgiveness forgiveness. And I can tell you there has been some serious pain that I've witnessed where you have someone who's been doing everything right for maybe 7 or 8 years in terms of public service loan forgiveness. And I had to tell them during those years, hey, you did everything right, except this loan isn't eligible. And the problem is when you consolidate that loan, you're going to start back from zero. And you would see people with 7, 8 years worth of credit literally knocked back to month one. It was really, really devastating. During the Biden administration, however, they changed those rules. And what would happen was instead of taking a consolidated loan and starting over at zero, they would take a weighted average of the forgiveness credits on the loans that were being consolidated. And there was a formula that they would use to essentially assign credit to the newly consolidated loan. We don't have to go through that calculation, but the bad news about why we don't have to go through it is because they actually are going back to the old rules where when you consolidate a loan, you start from zero, no matter how much forgiveness credit you had prior to the consolidation. This is now important to both the Parent Plus camp and non-Parent Plus borrowers. For non-Parent Plus borrowers, it's important because you now need to make sure, especially if you have student loans where you've already gotten forgiveness credits, that there's an actual reason to consolidate your loans. If you can't articulate a good reason, you need to be very careful because it may not be worth the risk in seeing that forgiveness credit go back to zero. If you're a Parent Plus borrower and you have already done things like the double consolidation, if you're already on a convenient income-driven repayment plan, if you're already pursuing public service loan forgiveness, you are not one of the people that needs to consolidate by April 1st. Don't be afraid by the urgency of my message and then take that information and consolidate a loan that was already in a good position, because if you do so, you will lose those forgiveness credits and you'll start back at zero. This is a very unfortunate development, but it's one nonetheless that is incredibly important to understand so that you're not one of those people that is surprised by that resetting of your credits. The second thing that I said we needed to take time to break down is allowing defaulted borrowers to access the IBR plan. I've said many times, my prayer is that when I release these episodes and I talk about defaulted student loan borrowers, that nobody has a defaulted student loan, because it is one of the worst financial circumstances that you could experience. However, during the Biden administration, there was an ability that was opened up for borrowers to access an income-driven repayment plan even when their student loans were in defaulted status. That is going away. What they're now saying is we're going back to the old rules with defaulted student loans. And those rules were, if the loan's in default status, your options are pay it off in full. You can consolidate the loan and then have access to an income-driven repayment plan. The downside to that is that the default status stays on your credit report. It's not removed. And if those loans prior to going into default status had forgiveness credits attached, you would obviously lose those credits because of the consolidation. The next option and final option was to rehabilitate the loan, which is a process that's still available where over a series of time, 9 to 10 months, you essentially make payments in good faith under an income-driven repayment plan. And if you follow that plan as intended, they will remove the default status from your credit report and also open up access to all the plans. So those are now the rules of the law, that we're going back to the old rules that you need to be aware of if you're listening to this and your loans are in default status. Again, I hope that's not the case for anyone who's tuning in today. However, there was like a very small thing that they did keep access to as a result of this court action, and that is the way that they credit loans that have been in forbearance or deferment for longer than is legally allowed. A quick recap on this: we saw a lot of people have their loans forgiven because of this misstep by federal student loan servicers. You're technically, with loans that are older loans, not supposed to be able to be in deferment or forbearance for longer than 12 months consecutively and 36 months cumulatively. Yet there were student loan servicers who were letting people be in forbearance for years and years and years. And as a part of the Biden administration, what they did was they said for any periods of deferment or forbearance exceeding 12 months consecutively, 36 months cumulatively, we're going to give those people credit as if they had been paying. So it's not the entire period, it's just the periods exceeding those allowable limits. This is actually something that the Trump administration is saying they are going to keep. So they will continue to give forgiveness credit credits for people whose forbearance or deferment periods exceeded that allowable limit. I know I've given you more bad news than good news today, but there was another element of this that was good news, and that is the potential return of the Income Driven Repayment Plan tracker. So if you're looking, it says, when will the Education Department begin to display IDR payment counters on studentaid.gov? It said the court actions require that we modify the display of the IDR payment counters, which will require additional system changes. We are working to update our systems to make those changes. That is actually positive news because it is an indication that they may return the tracker to the studentaid.gov website where you could actually see how much credit you had towards income-driven repayment plan forgiveness. This is a departure from the most recent news that we had heard, which is essentially them implying in court that that IDR tracker was dead in the water and was not going to return. More information on the public service loan forgiveness buyback process, if that is something that you've been interested in. That is a program where people who are pursuing public service loan forgiveness, meaning they have federal student loans and they were working for a nonprofit or a government entity, as a part of that program, you have to pay your loans for 10 years while working for an eligible organization. If you do so, your loans will be wiped away. There's a bunch of people, tens and tens of thousands of people who have worked for eligible institutions while having federal student loans, but they weren't making payments towards their loans during those periods. And now they're looking back with regret saying, man, if I had just made that payment, I'd be so much closer to public service loan forgiveness, or I would have gotten my public service loan forgiveness because I would have 10 years already if I had just made payments during that time. PSLF buyback exists to correct that record. If you're someone who has 10 years worth of work experience at a nonprofit or government entity, even if you didn't make federal student loan payments during that time, the PSLF buyback program allows you to go back to those periods and pay basically what you would have paid based on what you were making on that time and restore those credits. And it's a program that people are using to have a tremendous amount of student loan debt wiped away, provided they can go back and make the payments for what they would have paid at that time. We've seen people who have had $200,000 worth of student loans forgiven because they've gone back and made 3 years worth of payments that equated to less than $10,000. So imagine being in a scenario where someone tells you you owe $200,000 on your federal student loans, you give us $8,000 and we're all square. Those are the types of opportunities that exist under this payment program. Now, as a part of that program, from July 1st, 2024 and forward, there have been a lot of people who are looking at that stretch of time and they're saying, well, if I want to buy back that stretch of time, what payment plan are you going to use to calculate my payments? Because typically they say, hey, we'll let you pay what you would have paid on the lowest payment plan possible. Well, on this announcement, they're basically sharing that they're still going to allow you to do that, but they're not going to allow you to make the calculation of what you would have paid using the save plan formula. They're going to use the formula of the lowest payment across either the old or new version of income-based repayment, pay-as-you-earn, or income contingent repayment plan. So that's a bit of clarity, but now let's go to the last amount of clarity, and this has to do with people who are currently on the SAVE plan and are in administrative forbearance. So if you're on the SAVE plan, you don't have to make payments, but you're not getting credit towards forgiveness while you're in forbearance under SAVE. And there's also interest that's accruing on your loans. There's still people who have decided that that's the right thing for them to do, but now they are trying to figure out, okay, well, if the SAVE plan is ending, when does it end and what happens next? We now have those details because the Department of Education put out a second press release on March 27th of 2026, telling details about what comes next for borrowers in the SAVE plan. I will tell you, I try to keep the politics out of it, but this is just an absolutely ridiculous press release. The point, however, of the press release was to tell people when they will formally be kicked off of the SAVE plan. And when will that be? It starts July 1st. So what's going to happen is on July 1st, you're going to get some type of notification or communication from your federal student loan servicer. That communication is going to detail that you have 90 days to exit the SAVE plan. The 90 days starts on July 1st. Your options for new plans will be, if you choose not to just let them do it for you, go to any eligible income-driven repayment plan of your choice. We spent a lot of time on previous episodes walking through what those eligible plans may be. If you do not take action within the 90 days, they're going to automatically transition you to the standard loan repayment plan. And I can assure you, if you needed to sign up for the SAVE plan because you needed to lower your student loan payment, you do not want to be on the standard plan. So this is essentially saying, if you don't want to get kicked on that plan and have your student loan payments potentially skyrocket, you need to take action sometime within this 90 days. If not, the standard plan is what it will be. They also put themselves on the line by saying that the repayment assistance plan, which is the new income driven repayment plan that they are creating, will be available by that time on July 1st. So they've said mid-year 2026, but they say a lot of things, and that's not just a Trump thing, that's a Biden administration thing as well. Can't really trust any administration when it comes to the timeliness of certain federal student loan actions. But again, they're putting it on paper saying on July 1st, if you've decided that the repayment assistance plan is right for you, that plan will be available. I keep promising that we're going to do an episode dedicated to the repayment assistance plan, and we still will. It's just that these more urgent things keep jumping the line for what we're going to talk about. But I'm hopeful that now that we have a deadline for the SAVE plan, now that we know that there's a deadline of April 1st for Parent Plus borrowers, we can take a couple of episodes off from the urgent information and get into things like the nitty-gritty of the repayment assistance plan. So if you follow Escape Student Loan Debt podcast only, you're good to go. When we have that episode, you'll know. If you're a New Money, New Problems listener and federal student loans are important to you and you don't listen to the Escape Student Loan Debt podcast, you need to subscribe, because that's probably not an episode that we're going to release on the New Money, New Problems platform moving forward. From Escape Student Loan Debt, this was the Escape Student Loan Debt podcast, a show for established professionals whose student loan payments or loan balances are impacting their marriage, their business, their credit, or their dream of achieving homeownership.